Good morning and welcome to the Highway 13 Business Information Session brought to you by the Burnsville Chamber and the Savage Chamber of Commerce. With that, I'm going to turn it over to my partner here, Ann Massis from the Savage Chamber of Commerce. Thanks, Ann.
Yes, thank you, Jennifer, and thank you for the Burnsville Chamber partnership on this event. It's nice to see everybody here this morning. First, I want to thank Minnesota Department of Transportation for partnering with us, as well as Bolton and Mank. So thanks to everybody for being here. As we know, Highway 13 is important for both of our communities, but it's also important regionally as well. A lot of goods come down Highway 13. So we asked Minnesota Department of Transportation to come present to us. They're in the process of getting the project going. And so we have Chris Cromie here. He's with Bolton and Mank. He is the principal transportation engineer with Bolton and Mank. Chris is very familiar with Highway 13. He is located at the Bolton and Mank facility in Burnsville, which is very conveniently located right off Highway 13. So Chris is passionate about working with clients to create safe and efficient transportation systems throughout the upper Midwest. He began his career in 1993. He leads Bolton and Mank's transportation work group. His experience includes transportation system planning, traffic engineering, and roadway and trail design and construction. Chris has a track record of success delivering and managing highly visible multimodal transportation projects. So welcome, Chris. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate this opportunity, and on behalf of MnDOT, we're excited to have this group together here to talk about what's planned and in store for Highway 13 through Savage and Burnsville. So what I would like to do is I have a presentation that I'll walk through, but we can keep this relatively informal. If you got a question along the way, certainly raise your hand or interrupt. I would prefer that over talking to myself for 30 minutes. So feel free to interrupt. I'll get this presentation started. Looks like it's ready to go. Everybody see the screen all right? All right. So what I would like to do here today is just walk through what we're trying to accomplish on Highway 13 between 169 and Nicollet Avenue in Burnsville. We'll talk a little bit about where we've been, how we got to where we're at, but more importantly, what's the future look like for Highway 13. So as I mentioned, we're studying the corridor between Nicollet Avenue all the way over to Highway 101 and 169. As many of you know, we've had a number of improvements on this corridor over the last 10 years. It's really a corridor that's trying to find its identity in the metro area system. It is an important east-west corridor for sure, as was described, for movement of freight, commuters, bike peds, everything that happens along the river. So we embarked on this study with the goals to have a better understanding of the corridor as a whole, not just the problems at specific locations, but understand the problems altogether. Reach consensus with the various agencies out here that have jurisdiction on roadways. 2 cities, 2 counties, MnDOT, Met Council's jurisdiction is here. We have 2 transit providers within the corridor. So we wanted to reach consensus to what this corridor wants to be in the future and start growing towards that. And then certainly a goal to improve freight access at the intersections at Dakota and Yosemite. I drove through this morning. The train was going through. The trucks were backed out onto Highway 13, as many of us see on a regular basis. So those are the goals of the study: is to understand needs, reach a common vision for everyone to rally around, and then get some immediate improvements at the freight access locations. So a little bit of background, Highway 13 is carrying more traffic than it was ever designed to. 56,000 cars a day go through downtown Savage on Highway 13. That roadway, typically a 4-lane signalized roadway like that, we would expect to carry 40 to 45, maybe 50,000 cars a day. Through our study, we recognize that there are several intersections along the corridor that have more crashes than what we would expect for the amount of traffic that is going through there. And I'm sure you've all experienced the sirens you hear going to the crash sites on a fairly regular basis. We know that Highway 13 is not real efficient or safe for trucks. There's a lot of truck traffic going in and out of the ports, going in and out of waste management. There's a lot of retail and industrial and Savage. So it is certainly a high freight corridor, high large truck corridor. And then pedestrian and bicyclists, we do have a downtown area. There really isn't a connected bike ped facility along the corridor. There's plans for it, but we wanted to incorporate some of that into the vision. We started the corridor study 2 years ago now, almost to the day that we started out understanding the issues of the corridor. This corridor has been studied a number of times over the last 20 years, and it was our intent that this is going to be the last study. We're going to move projects forward. We reached a consensus amongst the agencies on what the ultimate vision for Highway 13 looks like. And then we moved into our environmental review process and design for the corridor improvements. And I'll talk a little bit more detail about that. As we move into the fall or the last quarter of 2021, we're now putting together construction documents for our first project that will begin in the spring of 2022 at Dakota Avenue. And then that project is the first project out of the chute from the corridor study. There will be a number of projects coming on Highway 13 over the next, I'll say 5 to 15 to 20 years. So what is the corridor vision? What is the footprint? The corridor vision in my world is really our ability to agree upon where primary and secondary access along the corridor will occur, and then what types of intersection control are at those locations. As we plan corridors, we plan not just for the corridor itself, but how the corridor ties into the local roadway system, sidewalks and trails, and we design it to work as a system. The footprint is a term that we use in the environmental review process. The footprint is the area in which we believe to construct the recommended improvements will be disturbed, and any sensitive areas in there will need to mitigate for that. For this project, we are using a relatively new process with MnDOT and FHWA meant to streamline the environmental review process for future projects. We used to do environmental reviews for every single project, and there was a lot of duplicate work, and we started at the beginning of the timeline each time. What we did on this corridor is we did an environmental assessment for the whole corridor, for the half dozen or dozen projects that could potentially come out of this corridor study. We identified the footprint, and what that will enable us to do is get environmental clearance for the whole corridor, and then we'll be ahead of the game as we get future projects funded and moving forward. We should have bought about a year on each of the projects that we have coming up. This process also enables us some flexibility to package projects, if package projects or do certain intersection improvements depending on the funding available. If we get $5 million, we can find a $5 million improvement. If we got $25 million, we can do a $25 million improvement. So it gives us that flexibility, which is good. So this is what the agreed upon vision for the corridor is. And I'll step through this a little bit. Of course, we have the relative recent improvements at Highway 13-101. That project was built back in the 2011, 2012 timeframe. And then County Road 5, both of those have some grade separation. County Road 5 is a full interchange now. The other primary intersections that we're going to maintain full access at are at Dakota Avenue, which is right at the ports of Savage. Quinton Avenue, which is on the west end of downtown Savage. Chowan Avenue, which is on the east end of downtown and on the Savage Burnsville border. And then Nicollet Avenue, just east of Highway 35. We are also built some flexibility to provide some secondary access at Lynn Avenue and Washburn Avenue. Both of those locations have traffic signals at them today, so all the movements are occurring there. At Lynn Avenue, because of the tightness of that corridor and some of the alternatives that we're looking at for Chowan and Quinton, we can't maintain full access there. So we're looking at how do we build the local roadway system to the primary intersection so that safe and convenient access can still be provided. Similarly, at Washburn, the proximity of Washburn to County Road 5 is a challenge as people are entering and exiting County Road 5 in a freeway type environment and then encountering that traffic signal. So at grade improvements that could occur out here could include higher capacity at grade intersections. What you see here as an at grade, that would be a signalized R cut. This is where we remove the crossing movement and the left turn out movement, but it creates a much more efficient intersection and we can still get access off of the highway and into businesses and into the local roadway system, and then connect people back to the highway, either through the local roadway system and to the primary intersections or through U-turns on the roadway itself. A freeway type facility, I think we're all familiar with those. Those are relatively common. That's the Interstate 35, it's 212, it's 169 through this area where we have grade separation or bridges to separate the conflicts on the roadway. And then we have a hybrid, which would be a mix of at grade and freeway type solutions, all built, all within the flexibility of that corridor footprint. So on the corridor concepts, we've had a number of public engagement feedback sessions. Going back all the way, actually, we had some of our initial stuff in February of 2020, just before COVID in person, and then through COVID in 2020, where we did some virtual stuff, and then some hybrid stuff here more recently. But some of the things that we heard from the public, business owners, property owners, those who chose to participate. Between Quinton Avenue and Washburn, we did hear some support for hybrid options, at grade, end grade separated type improvements, largely because it's the challenge of maintaining traffic flow and also providing safe and convenient access in a relatively tight area. There was clear recognition that there's issues with the traffic and safety, the congestion that's a regular thing on Highway 13, and then obvious concerns for loss or change in access to neighborhoods and businesses with the freeway options. At Nicollet Avenue is a little bit different animal for us. The focus at Nicollet Avenue, what we heard is really the need for improvement for people walking, because this intersection is so important for transit, both MBTA and Metro Transit sites, kitty corner from one another there, and then the heart of the city and some of the dense land uses that are there demand improvements for people walking.
Hey, Chris, before you move on, there's a question in the chat of, can you elaborate on what you meant by environmental clearance?
I sure can. I do have a few slides on it a little bit later. Okay. So the corridor footprint, as I mentioned, that we moved through we're in the final stages of moving through the environmental review process, and getting environmental clearance for. It includes the whole corridor footprint. We have a project fully funded and ready to go for construction next year over at the Dakota Yosemite area. And then we're continuing to work as a team, MnDOT, Met Council, FHWA, the cities, the counties, on the implementation plan and phasing and sequencing of future projects. So if there's a question when is Washburn going to change? I don't know that we know the answer to that yet. We just know that it will change as the corridor evolves towards the vision that we're setting out. So I'll talk a little bit about the Dakota Avenue improvements in Savage, and I'm going to go a little bit quicker here. We looked at three options and evaluated three options, three viable options. One was this Buttonhook concept that included a bridge over Dakota Avenue, and then some quick on and offs to the frontage road system at that location. We looked at a tight diamond, which again brings Highway 13 up and over Dakota Avenue, so trucks and passenger vehicles would be able to go under Highway 13 between the ports and the area south of Highway 13. And then we looked at a shifted Dakota overpass where we would have kept Highway 13 at grade and built a bridge halfway in between Yosemite and Dakota Avenue. A lot goes into the evaluation summary. One of those things is what we heard from the users of those intersections, and what we heard through the public engagement process last fall and into the spring is a lot of support for the grade separation options. The tight diamond seems to make the most sense and best serves the needs. Support for constructing new frontage roads with the design options. Some concerns about some of the alternatives and how trucks and the large volume of trucks that come in and out of this area would navigate, as well as acceleration, deceleration items. Ultimately, that tight diamond, in addition to the public engagement and how we evaluated it for operations and safety, truck queuing, environmental impacts and ability to avoid impacts or minimize impacts. The impact on the railroad was important, and how we were able to work with the railroad. Constructability, business screening, right-of-way impacts, and overall costs. There's rarely a perfect alternative. We basically have to find what best meets the needs of all these competing interests to get a project to move forward. So it is the tight diamond that will be constructed next year, 22 and into the 23 timeframe. It includes elevating Highway 13 up and over Dakota Avenue. Dakota Avenue will be relatively at the same grade that it is today. For eastbound traffic, there will be a traditional exit ramp and entrance ramp back on right at Dakota Avenue. And we have to move the frontage road a little bit further to the south just to get it to all fit in. For westbound, it's a little bit different at exiting and entering. After you leave Quinton Avenue, going west towards 101 and 169, there will be a slip ramp that goes over to Vernon Avenue just before the railroad trestle. Some of you may not even know Vernon Avenue is there. It's a relatively lightly used road used for dredging in the river mostly, but there is a public street there. So exit to Vernon, then we have a one-way frontage road that we will sneak under the railroad underpass or overpass that's there, over to Yosemite. At Yosemite Avenue, that frontage road becomes a two-lane or two-way frontage road, so that Yosemite traffic will be able to come over and use the Dakota Avenue as well. Traffic from Highway 13 can get all the way up over to Dakota, cross under Highway 13 at Dakota. And then to get back on comes a more traditional entrance ramp to go westbound Highway 13. So that project is going to get built starting next year. And obviously the bigger impact is how do we get from point A to point B? How do we get to that diamond interchange? And we looked at a number of alternatives for staging of construction, the length of construction, impacts to traffic, impacts to the adjacent roadway system. We looked at 3 scenarios. And I'll talk briefly about each of these, but I will start by saying we're not closing Highway 13 for an entire construction season, but there will be some significant traffic impacts on Highway 13 for the bulk of the construction season next year. So we looked at keeping 4 lanes of traffic open, 2 lanes in each direction. And then we looked at the potential for signalizing both Dakota and Yosemite. For construction, what we end up doing is we narrow lanes, we bring everything together to make room to construct something, and then we shift traffic onto the constructed area. Ultimately, we determined that this wasn't going to work. We couldn't get those traffic signals to function properly, along with the railroad crossings there. We had to dismiss this one, and this was our one alternative to keep 2 lanes of traffic in each direction open for the bulk of the traffic or bulk of the construction season. We did look at a full closure. We do typically look at full closure of principal arterials like Highway 13, really as a means to expedite the construction. If we could get something constructed in 6 months rather than 12 months by closing it, when we have adjacent alternatives for traffic, we do consider that. We are not closing Highway 13 for the full season. Ultimately, the benefits that we would receive with quicker construction weren't there. We may have shaved a month or two off, but we would have had a lot more pain on the local system down on County Road 42, McCall Drive, and even up into the Bloomington area. So we're not closing the road for an extended period of time. What we are doing and what we are moving forward with, and again, this is to prepare you starting for next year construction, is Highway 13 will be reduced down to a single lane in each direction. It'll be a 2-lane, what we call a pipeline option. Pipeline being we have limited or no conflicts within the construction zone itself. So there will be no left turns, there'll be no crossing movements on there. It's really meant to be the most efficient means of keeping that 1 lane of traffic moving. It will include changes in access to get in and out of the ports. It will include changes in access to get in and out of the businesses along the freeway. The signal at Quinton Avenue will remain in operation for the duration. We will be accommodating U-turns for trucks going in and out of the ports. And then similarly, Highway 13 101, we're going to be doing some construction to provide for U-turns underneath the bridge so that traffic can get in and out of the businesses along this stretch. And then we also will be making improvements to 26th Street here off of Highway 13 and over into the area. We are fortunate we have a good local frontage road on the south side to keep access, and we will keep that frontage road accessible through the duration of construction. We are working through some of the local traffic mitigation. We do expect additional traffic on Highway 13 south here. We do expect more traffic on 42. We do expect more traffic on McCall, reducing from 4 lanes to 2 lanes for the duration of the construction season next year. Will have a big impact and a big shift on how people drive. I mentioned earlier, there's 55,000 vehicles a day going through downtown Savage, and that is in excess of the capacity. We're going to reduce that down to even further, where we may not be able to accommodate more than 25,000-30,000 vehicles a day on that pipeline. We will be having a public open house on October 12th, where we'll have more details on the traffic mitigation measures. So in summary, we're going to start construction in 2022. The duration of and staging of traffic is still in the works. We'll have more information of that in October. We do expect the construction to extend into 2023, but the traffic impacts will be less in 2023 than in 2022. And we do have on the project website, on MnDOT's website, we do have ways to sign up for regular information on the construction project, weekly information on when things may be changing, what you can expect, how the project is moving along. So I'm going to shift back to the environmental assessment review. There was a question about what is environmental clearance, and I'll get into that here. So an environmental assessment is an environmental review process that is required by federal law. We do have federal funds that we'll be using in the corridor, and it's really a comprehensive review of all the protected items within the corridor and how the project is navigating them to avoid or minimize those impacts. Our team is in the process of completing the environmental assessment for the whole corridor footprint and the first construction project. We had a public hearing back in June for this, and for the we had a public comment period on our environmental assessment from June 8th to July 8th, with the public hearing that was on Monday, June 28th. And that was both an in-person and virtual public hearing. And we expect the finding of no significant impact here later this month. So the environmental review process. So the question was, what is the environmental clearance? So I mentioned this is an overview, an overall review of how the project may be protecting, avoiding, mitigating, or minimizing impacts to, or mitigating impacts to vegetation and wildlife that are in the corridor, water resources, community impacts, the impacts that come with a large construction project, and then other areas of concern such as contaminated materials, right-of-way, and economic impacts. So when I mentioned environmental clearance, we expect to have environmental clearance for the impacts and the mitigation measures required for the Dakota Avenue improvement, as well as the impacts of the overall corridor vision. Once we have projects that move forward, we'll have to do some additional environmental review specific to that project to get approval for the mitigation of any impacts. So I mentioned the finding of no significant impact. We expect that later this month. We have a business advisory meeting coming up on October 7th, public open house on the 12th, and spring of 22 construction for the first project at Dakota Avenue. There's ways to stay connected through website and email updates. Certainly reach out to Michael Corbett and others at MnDOT. We will have a construction liaison assigned to this project and introduced at the meetings here in October. So I'll go over to the chat here. Did I cover the question on environmental clearance? So Mr. Fong asked.
Was trying to get background on. I mean, I'm familiar with the assessments. I was just wondering if the clearance meant something specific.
Yeah, what it specifically means, the assessment identifies what needs to be done. The clearance says you've been given approval to move the project forward, and here are the permits that you need to get to prior to construction.
Okay. Thank you.
There's a question about any chance for a roundabout at Quinton and Highway 13 intersection. Unfortunately, no. The traffic volumes at that location are so high east-west that a roundabout there doesn't function. We have a number of at-grade and grade separated concepts within the footprint. Some similar to what's at Highway 13 101, where one of the directions of the roadway would be elevated at Quinton. But unfortunately, the full at-grade intersection alternatives wouldn't work at Quinton Avenue. There's too much traffic moving through there. Any chance for bus only shoulder each way in the corridor that will be single lane? This is something, Chad, we can take a look at in our staging. I think with certainty there's going to be times where that's not going to be possible, but there may be times that it is possible, and we'll see if we can incorporate that into the staging plan. And then I guess with that, I'll ask if there's any other questions that I could field or.
I didn't intend for the roundabout at the intersection, but south of that intersection on that frontage road. That's where it gets kind of hard to cross and with
Sure,
more traffic.
Yeah, that's a good point. That when I mention local traffic impacts, that's some of the things that we're wrapping up our study on, as to how the local roadway system performs along with Highway 13, and intersection control changes like at the frontage road in Quinton, a roundabout at that type of location certainly will be considered at the time that a change in traffic control is necessitated. So we'll take that, David, we'll take that to note and take a closer look at that.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any other questions?
This is a great presentation. Thank you for covering this. This is a great opportunity, gang, while you have Chris here, as well as some MnDOT staff and others. Are there any other questions about the study, about what's happening on Highway 13?
There is an exit that was removed on 13, right around like El Loro's. I understand that there wouldn't be a right in onto Highway 13, that wouldn't work, but why was the right, why was the exit removed? That could have made it easier for the businesses in that area.
So the access changes that occurred, I'm trying to remember how long ago that was. 6, 7, 8 years ago, maybe longer. It was when the Quinton Avenue traffic signal went in, and there was an improvement made where Quinton Avenue was moved a little bit to the west. And because of the interaction with the two signals, it made some of those right turn intersections more challenging to accommodate movements in and out of there. So that with the traffic signal, there was a consolidation of access with the hopes that traffic coming on and off of Highway 13 would use the signalized intersections rather than the unsignalized.
Yeah, I mean, I understand having traffic enter Highway 13 would be much better at the signalized intersections. Just wondered why an exit off of Highway 13, it would actually, wouldn't it actually make it easier if they could just exit off that Highway 13 there?
It doesn't make it easier on Highway 13 because we start having overlapping movements. One vehicle is accelerating, the other one's decelerating, and you introduce more conflict in the traffic flow with that.
Okay.
There was another question. So Nicollet Avenue upgrades won't happen until 2023. I don't know. I think 2023 would be awfully optimistic to get to improvements on 2023. The project that's happening, that's funded and will start construction, is over at Dakota Avenue. The Nicollet Avenue upgrades, I know, are a priority for the city of Burnsville. Jennifer and I were on a field walk with Angie Craig's office yesterday, along with MnDOT and the city transit providers, basically promoting the improvements at Nicollet Avenue and working on securing funding for those. But the funding has not been secured for Nicollet Avenue upgrades. So I don't have a timeline as to when those improvements will happen.
I think, Chris, in layman's terms, the corridor study is wrapping up, laying the groundwork for future improvements, but Dakota is the only one that's currently funded and in the queue. Everything else is in planning phases, and it's a question of when the funding comes available. And the city is going after a raised grant, some federal funds for the Nicollet intersection. That's a very competitive grant. Everybody keep your fingers crossed. But it's, my understanding is it's a bit of a long shot, but we're certainly, the city and MnDOT and everybody's trying everything they can to find, it's a question of putting funding packages together for these other parts of the corridor, correct?
That's correct. And like the Dakota Avenue project, Carolyn, what do we have? 6 different funding sources, 7 different funding sources?
Yeah, we have several different funding sources. Scott County was very instrumental in going after different grants and regional solicitations, different federal funding sources to get a project put together. And I see Nicollet coming together kind of the same way, is that there's going to be different funding programs coming available. As Jennifer mentioned, there's the RAISE grant that's been applied for. There's regional solicitation opportunities coming up, as well as, there's lots of talk in the news about what federal funds are coming for transportation, as well as from the state level. What if we're going to get anything from bonding or other sources this session, starting up here soon. So I think there's opportunities out there for funding right now. Nothing has been secured for Nicollet Avenue. One of the things about the way we put together the study and this hybrid environmental document is it makes it a pretty attractive package, because we've had federal highways involved already, and they've agreed to what the impacts are for the environmental resources that are out there at Nicollet Avenue, which will then kind of streamline the process of developing a project, because we don't have to do all that research and we don't have to do all of that coordination with, it's not just federal highways with this environmental document. All of the federal cooperating agencies have weighed in on it and given their kind of 2 cents on if they agree with what we put together or not. So hopefully, we're waiting to hear back from federal highways. We're actually have a meeting to discuss the finding of no significant impact early next week, and hoping to have the final sign off from them this month still. But that will really, I think, help any future projects, because it's a lot of work that's already done. Took us the bulk of the last 2 years to get to that.
I think the message that we heard yesterday was the way to make things happen is to be ready when it comes to transportation project. Wasn't that what they said? And so I think I want to thank on behalf of Burnsville, our businesses, our city, I'm sure Ann and Savage, for the efforts. I mean, you look at 2019 to today, this corridor study, getting the ducks in a row for these projects to happen, so that when the funding packages can be put together, this stuff has to all be in place to do that. So thank you to everybody involved, from Chris and your team at Bolton and Mank and MnDOT and all the county, city, private partners involved. Are there any other questions or anything any of the other partners involved in the project want to share? Any final messages?
This is Michael Corbett. Just wanted to share, one of my other duties is to do, interchange planning review. I'm more on the planning end of things, and doing a study like this really sets you up for success. I mean, Bolton and Mank, for instance, did a wonderful study a number of years ago on US 10 in Anoka County. That really set them up for success as they got more interchanges taken care of over time. And I think this is no different. And this has been probably the most common way to get a corridor set up for being really well positioned for any sort of future competitive grant funding sources and regional solicitation, things like that. So, and we want to help you guys make that happen.
Thanks. Anybody else? Any final questions? I see my partner Ann is still technically logged in, but I think she also had a conflict. Ann, did you have anything you wanted to say to wrap up here? If not, I think she's tied up with something at the moment. On behalf of the Savage Chamber, the Burnsville Chamber, Bolton and Mank, MnDOT, everybody, thanks for joining us this morning. Thanks for tuning in. And we look forward to this project moving forward. We'll continue to share updates as they come. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.